So, guys, I want to do another tough video, and I want to call this Apples for Bro Bullies. And what happened was that I used to participate in a competition called the 48-Hour Film Project. And I remember, like, how one year I was just manipulated and bullied by a filmmaker in Connecticut. He took some of my ideas, and I remember, like, how he made a film based on some of my ideas, and he was very successful at the competition, and he was kind of rubbing it in my face. And it was also like the same situation where we were doing it at the film competition in New Haven, where I dealt with like bullying and things like that. So it was definitely kind of hard, but I also learned a lot of things about how to move forward, really. And ultimately, just understanding some people are really nasty, some people are really dirty. And part of filmmaking is definitely just to be resilient, because you're not always going to meet the nicest people. And then also too, that there's a lot of people that know how to look like scumbags, and they actually just know how to look like mentors, or these really educated people, when actually they just rip a lot of people off or things like that. So I remember in 2015, I was working with this filmmaker named Sal in New Haven, and he worked for a couple of my projects. But he also always had this mentality of going onto film sets where there are people who are very amateur, like amateur directors, people trying to figure out how to be a director, how to get their ideas done. And he would always be like an actor. And what he would do is that he would always do things like take over the project, or be like, you know what, this film's not edited well, so I'm going to take all the footage and edit it in a better way. Like, always that type of person, like overly contributing. And I kind of learned that the reason why he did that was just to be like, hey, he knows what he's doing, and just to look like he's the hero of the film set. So all the other actors and all the other people on the project will be like, maybe I should work with this guy named Sal, because he knows how to kind of come in and fix everything. But it was just his way of just saying, hey, you know what? He knows what he's doing. The amateur directors don't know what they're doing, so he just wants to look really, really good, and then have people be like, "Hey, you know what? Maybe we should go work with him because he knows how to get projects done." He was also the type of person that would backtalk a lot of people and be like, "Hey, you know what? This director isn't doing a great job. Come work for me," or things like that. So there is a thing about first of all, understanding personalities and understanding how people work, really. And then also understanding that sometimes when you start out in filmmaking, there's a lot of people who just will take advantage, because like there's places like Connecticut where there are not a lot of people doing films. There's a lot of people who don't really help out on film sets. So it's ultimately like when people can find a way to get people working on their projects for free or for a little, they will do anything that they want, really, even if it's like manipulating people to just leave other projects and work for them, really. And he was very much like that. The other part of Sal was that I know, like, one time, we were going to like a writers group. He took me to a writers group. We had dinner afterwards, and we were talking about ideas, and we talked about the 40 hour film project. And I said something like, there's this girl named Abigail who's 8 or 9 years old. And I said something to him like, you know what, for a film to be successful, maybe somebody should take her, mentor her, and have her become like a director for a project, really, because they seem to be very high on women at the 48. And then also too, I know that they're very high on her because everybody talks very good about her. And and that's good foreshadowing for this story, because later on he took that idea and made a film and stole my idea. The other thing about Sal was that I know, like, he had this project called The Sparrow Falling, where he had a bunch of people work on that project. And I remember, like, he was asking me to be a behind the scenes photographer for that. And he would say things like, what do you want to do? Do you want to continue making shitty fucking 48-hour film projects? Or do you want to actually work with me and become a better filmmaker? Nothing in your fucking life has been a good film, you fucking, and other shit like that. And I also remember when I worked on the Sparrow Falling project, it was good for a while, but there were times when, he would be like berating cast and crew. There would be times when, I think there was one time, there's this one actor, they got mad and almost had a big fight with another actor. There was this guy, Noel, who would keep, just making a high stress set and whatever, really. And I remember, like, there were certain times where actors and everybody would be bad talking Noel, or it would be doing skits or rehearsals where they'd be talking shit about Noel and other things like that. So it was ultimately kind of not really a bunch. It was like professional in some ways, and the quality of the work was professional, and in other ways it was very very unprofessional. And then I remember that year in 2017, there was the 48-hour film project, so I helped this guy named JV on his project, and I also helped my friend Wesley. So I did two projects that weekend. Now I started at 6 a.m. and worked until 5 p.m. doing behind the scenes with my friend Wesley, and then I worked from 5 p.m. all the way to like 3:30 p.m. on on Sunday. Um, with my friend JV really. And then I remember like talking to Sal and he said, fuck that competition. I wiped my ass for that competition. It's a waste of time. I've told you, Byron, it's a waste of time because it's an amateur competition. So when they're showing everybody's films, um, Sal and Abigail were in the front row, like this little 8-year-old girl, and they were talking, they're kind of nodding while they're talking to each other. And I kind of saying, okay, they obviously made a film together. And and obviously too they're kind of like having that that snooty director persona, like nodding, acting kind of supportive. And she made a film, and what it really was that she was put as the director of that film when she's like 8 or 9 years old, and she was also somebody very shy, knew nothing about filmmaking. So it's ultimately like give this little white girl and give this girl a director's credit really. And it was kind of like sad in a way because obviously when they showed the film, he said something like, "It's not like we, um, just slapped her name on a project. She actually did some work." And there was another thing too where she was credited for music when actually somebody else did all the music and other things like that. So it was ultimately like propping up Abigail really. And like I said, it was kind of bad in a way because imagine if there was the girl who was like 8 or 9 years old or even like a teenager, and they actually worked that weekend, they worked hard, they understood leadership skills, they understood being a director, and then they were going after the best director award versus somebody who's 8 or 9 and just shy as bricks really. And she's given that because she's cute and they want to look like what, they're pro women by giving it to somebody really. It's almost very similar to what happened in professional wrestling, where Tessa Blanchard became the first she became the first woman to hold a men's world heavyweight championship when she was barely over 100 pounds, when she was beating wrestlers like Brian Cage that could lift over 500-pound men really, and having matches with people like Sammy Callihan, who's a death match wrestler. So it really kind of felt the same way, where it was like it felt very forced. It felt like she got it because her mom was friends with a lot of the directors and like a lot of the producers of the event. It felt like, well, we just want to put it on we want to put it on her because she's a young girl, instead of like, okay, well, she has to work for it, she has to earn it, and other things like that. And I understood that there was a huge argument of if anybody has a complaint, they're petty. If anybody has a complaint, oh well, it must mean that they're sore losers or whatever. But also too, like when it comes to the 40-hour film project, it's a weekend competition. There's people staying out for like 2 or 3 days straight. There's people spending thousands of dollars on projects. There's people that who make really great work and they're overlooked. And it's also revealed that the person who ran the New Haven event, it was revealed that they stepped down because they did racism and discrimination at their job towards minorities really. So a lot of times in New Haven, there's been the only time that black people usually win is if it's usually for singing or choreography. Well, the old stereotype of black people love to sing and dance really. So it really hurt me that Sal did that. And I remember, like, another thing that happened was I was editing for my friend JV, and I got, like, and people wanted me to stand up while I was in the crowd and get acknowledged for the editing that I did because a lot of people were talking about my editing. I remember the event runner doing this to me while while I stayed up and people were applauding my editing. And I also remember, like, how Sal and other people were nodding and acting kind of like, a congratulations part. People are applauding your editing and whatever. And and I wanted to just punch Sal in the face for like kind of being a backstabber because, and I was kind of very proud of myself because I chose not to kind of go down to the stage when people wanted me to go down to the stage and get an ovation on stage because I did a great job editing for somebody's project. Or I chose not to go down to the stage in the first place because I was going through a lot of that time really. But I remember like telling myself, thank God I didn't go down to that stage because I would have punched Sal in the face or I would have beat his ass on stage really for taking my idea, looking like a hero and a mentor, when actually he was just, doing what he does best, really, which is he would steal a lot of people's ideas. And I remember like one time for the Sparrow Falling project, there was this guy named Ethan who did a really great job. And I kind of said, he's like the MVP of the project. So a day or two later, Sal made a, like a meme post saying that he's the MVP of the project. I remember like one time Sal telling me people use you more than you think. He had a friend named Rob, and we were talking about Pulp Fiction, and then Rob was saying things like, "Oh well, Tarantino wanted to act in Pulp Fiction because he wanted to say the word nigger in Dead Nigger Storage," and they're both looking at me like, what's Byron gonna do when we say the word nigger around him? And then also too, I remember Sal and Rob both like snickering at me when they were like, people use you more than you think, Byron, and other things like that. So Sal was really just like a big bully, and he was also one of those people, and a lot of people have said that behind his back that he was like definitely a big user, and he was always about his career, throw anybody on the bus for his own career, really. But there's definitely a lot of things that happen afterwards. I know, like I started traveling outside of Connecticut. I started to do film. I started participating in the 48 Ohio, 48 Atlanta, 48 um, Baltimore, Washington D.C., Boston. And I started traveling afterwards because I said like I really hate it in Connecticut, 48 Pittsburgh, because like in Connecticut I'm just treated like a nigger. I'm treated like I'm a stupid African American. I want to feel dead because my film community is so nasty, really. And it was good for me because I kind of told myself I hated working on Sal's projects because I kind of felt like I felt really much like a lackey. Like he had a few friends that got married. I was never invited to weddings. Um, there are times when they've wanted me to do audio and other things for other projects, and then they were getting mad that I messed up the audio because they were like so cheap that they're like, give it to Byron, even though he doesn't know what he's doing really. Maybe he'll do a good job. And I remember like one time I did a great job doing audio for Sal, and he was like saying, I should quit my day job. So I thought about going to New York City part time and doing audio for a couple of people. I did a good job for a while. Then I got fired from a film set because I was inexperienced and I was doing audio for 3 or 4 weeks. Then my friend John in Los Angeles said, "Hey, you know what? What the fuck, man? You don't take audio gigs when you are doing it for 3 or 4 weeks. It's like 3 or 4 years you're doing it, and then you take gigs." And I told him the whole situation. Like, my friend Sal said that I was more than qualified, and I said, "No, that's bullshit. You have to do it for a while." And I come off like I'm ripping people off. I said, "No, it's just I was told wrong information. And that was the truth, really. But I just don't do it. I stopped picking up audio gigs. I told him, like, what? I don't want to be known as like the asshole or anything like that, really. And I don't want to be known as ripping people off or inconsiderate. But I took very bad advice from Sal to be like, okay, once you do audio for like a few 3 or 4 days, and then you do projects for 3 or 4 weeks, you know what? You're more than qualified to quit your day job and do audio everywhere. Really, you know what you're doing, and that's not good, really." So he also taught me some very bad and stupid advice, really. I know one time he wanted me to do audio for a project. I accidentally formatted the audio device, meaning that it erased all the audio on it. And like almost a year later, they're asking me for the audio for that thing when I accidentally deleted it, and they totally blame me. I thought about paying $500 for that project, and I was saying no. I'm actually not going to do it because obviously if you hire somebody who doesn't know what they're doing, if you're insistent on hiring somebody who doesn't know what they're doing, it's your own fault. You don't put you don't put work on people who don't know what they're doing. Like I work at a hospital, and you have to go through like maybe a month or two of training before you work and before you work by yourself, really. But if you hired somebody who didn't know what they're doing, and rooms are unclean or people are in dirty rooms, it's the fault of the hospital for not training people properly. That's a good comparison. But he was, for what he was like MJF. He was a scumbag. He was a piece of shit, really, and he was really just an asshole. But I've also learned to be resilient because there's a lot of people like that. I know, like, I worked for another filmmaker who really praised my work when I was on stage, and people would like my work, but behind closed doors, he would say that I'm a shitty filmmaker. I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. And in some cases, that's true, but ultimately, too, really, I just learned that that's really true about filmmakers. Filmmakers are not the nicest people. Filmmakers are sociopaths. And I remember messing up my own life, getting myself fired, going down a really bad path, thinking of suicide, partially because of Sal, partially because of the bullying that I received in the Connecticut film community, partially because, partially also because of the 4 Hour Film Project, because it really taught me that behaving like a sociopath, being an asshole, being a jerk to people, throwing people under the bus to be successful is the way to go, really. But I stepped away from the Connecticut film community because I was like, there's too much of this behaving like a sociopath. Like, I even joked with my psychologist one day that I want to be like Hannibal Lecter. I want to be that level of a hurtful person and a sociopath because that behavior seems to be like rewarded in the Connecticut film community. What should I do when the next 4 Hour Film Project happens? Should I just go around running over people's dogs, or whatever, really? So people are busy with dog funerals instead of like competing. Like, it was really just an environment of behaving like a sociopath and being a shitty human being. But obviously, I learned that some film communities are like that. Some filmmaking communities are very just dirtbag and shitty people. But you don't let that stop you, really. You just have to keep doing what you need to do, really. But I learned to say, there's bullies, there's shitty people, but you just don't let that define you. And sometimes, people just know how to look like scumbags. Well, how to look like scumbags. People just know how to be scumbags and look like the hero of the story when they're actually really scumbags, just like Maxwell Jacob Freeman and this guy Sal that I used to know, who's actually a real piece of shit.